In the earlier stages of development, we explored how the self begins as undifferentiated presence, pure, immersive being. Then we watched as the sensorial field gave rise to edges and form. And from there, symbolic thought emerged, the ability to represent, to remember, to hold something within that which was once only available through presence. But the journey doesn't stop there. As symbols gain depth and relational meaning, they start to stabilize into something more complex. They gather emotional tone, they repeat, they layer. And over time, they begin to pattern. These patterns don't just float in thought. They shape the way we experience ourselves and others. We begin to take on roles. We build narratives. Certain emotions become familiar, and others less accessible. Some parts of us step forward often, others are hidden. This is the emergence of the patterned self, the aspect of identity most of us live from day to day. It's what we usually call a personality. But personality, from this perspective, is not a fixed structure. It's a living choreography, a collection of internal roles and relational maps formed through earlier developmental layers. And while it often appears consistent, it's always moving, always adjusting, always trying to stay coherent within a wider field of experience. In this stage, we don't just hold memory, we begin to become memory. And yet, we are still more than the patterns we've learned to. And yet, we are still more than the patterns we've learned to live inside. As the pattern self takes shape, something remarkable begins to happen. We start to carry relationships, not just with others, but within ourselves. These internal relationships are not random. They are formed through repeated emotional experiences, through the rhythms of presence and absence, through how we were seen or not seen, soothed or left alone. Over time, the mind and body consolidate these experiences into internalized object relations, living templates of self and other that play out within us, often without our awareness. Each one of these internal relationships is a kind of sub-self, what we often call a sub-personality. One part of you may feel confident and playful when around someone safe. Another might become tight, guarded, or withdrawn when certain tones or expressions show up. You may have a part that's eager to please, one that protects your boundaries, another that hides your shame. These sub-personalities are not disorders, they are intelligent adaptations. Each one learned to respond to the world in a specific way, based on the environment it developed in. They're formed in the same way that muscle memory is formed, through repetition, association, and the need to survive. And they're not isolated, they live in constellations. They shift in and out of awareness. They take the lead, depending on who we're with, what situation we're in, and what emotion is being triggered. Sometimes they're in harmony, other times they're in conflict, but all of them arise from the same field. The pattern self, then, is not one thing. It's a choreography of many things, each shaped by memory, meaning, and emotional tone. And while we might call it a personality, it's more accurate to say it's a living pattern, a constellation of roles, voices, and responses, trying to stay coherent in an ever-changing world. As these inner sub-personalities develop, they begin to find expression in the outer world through roles. The parts we play in families, in friendships, in society. Roles are how sub-personalities dress for the world. They are functional, recognizable, often rewarded. The achiever, the caregiver, the rebel, the peacemaker. Some roles help us feel valued, others help us stay safe. And over time, a handful of these become more familiar, more reflexive. Eventually, we start to believe that these roles are who we are. This is how identity forms, not as a singular truth, but as a kind of narrative compromise. We construct a stable sense of self out of a few dominant roles and internal voices, and we call it me. It feels solid, predictable, comforting even. But if we look closely, we'll see that identity is not a container, it's a lens. It's a way of organizing experience, a way of explaining ourselves to ourselves. But like all lenses, it filters. It leaves certain parts out. So much of adult life, then, is spent maintaining coherence within this patterned identity, keeping the story intact, the roles consistent, the parts in check. But the truth is, we are not one fixed self. We are many selves, layered within one another, nested within the deeper rhythms of presence and field. And when we forget this, we often become too identified with a single role or narrative. We lose contact with the wider field from which we came, the deeper I behind the roles, the unconditioned self that has no name, no job title, no emotional script. But thankfully, we have a way back. So how do we return to that wider field without rejecting the roles we've come to know? How do we hold the patterned self, its complexity, its contradictions, its story, with care, but without becoming fused to any one part? We begin with curiosity. Curiosity is the first shift in perspective. It is the moment we move from identification to observation. From I am this part to what is this part trying to do? It's subtle, but powerful. Curiosity opens space. It softens judgment. It invites us to ask rather than assume. Each subpersonality we carry, whether compliant, critical, playful, or protective, has a story, a need, a reason it emerged. And when we meet these inner figures not with resistance but with wonder, something new happens. We begin to listen. This is the beginning of self-inquiry, not as a mental exercise, but as a relational practice. We ask, what are you protecting? When did you first appear? What do you need from me now? In this way, we don't bypass the patterned self, we befriend it. We turn toward the complexity rather than away from it. And slowly the system reorganizes, not around defense or fear, but around truth, presence, and trust. The more curiosity we bring, the more coherence becomes possible. Roles become flexible. Identity becomes transparent. Subpersonalities begin to trust each other, and a deeper self begins to emerge, not as a role, but as a witness. A field of compassion, a presence that can hold it all. This is the true purpose of curiosity, not to analyze, but to integrate. To bring light into the pattern field, not by force, but by gentle attention. It is the voice of presence, speaking from within the system, not above it. It's easy to imagine that all of this, the subpersonalities, the roles, the inner dialogue, lives only in the mind. But the truth is, the patterned self is embodied. It doesn't just think, it breathes, it tightens, it flinches, it holds. Each subpersonality, each internal configuration, carries a physiological state. One part may live in high alert, raising cortisol, activating the sympathetic nervous system, preparing for conflict or rejection. Another may collapse into withdrawal, fatigue, apathy, even dissociation. Still another may seek stimulation, driven by the energy of urgency or pursuit. These aren't just psychological tendencies. They're neurobiological imprints, repeated survival strategies etched into the body's nervous, immune, and metabolic systems. The body, in this sense, becomes a map of meaning, a living record of what we've had to hold. When subpersonalities are unintegrated, the body often flips between these physiological states without coordination. One moment we're activated, the next we're numb. It's not dysfunction, it's patterned incoherence. The body reflecting the inner fragmentation of the field. But as integration unfolds, as curiosity, compassion, and presence begins to soften these inner tensions, the body begins to change. The nervous system becomes more flexible. Vagal tone improves. The immune system regulates. Digestion, metabolism, and energy patterns begin to recalibrate to the present moment, no longer stuck in the cycles of the past. This is why healing the pattern self isn't just about psychology. It's about physiology. It's about rhythm, and it's about coherence. When we meet the inner system with enough presence, the field reorganizes, and the body, once fractured by survival, begins to breathe as one again. The pattern self is where most of us live, navigating roles, stories, and inner voices that try to hold life together. But beneath these roles is something more fluid, more relational, more whole. Our subpersonalities are not barriers to truth, they are its protectors. Each one carries a piece of the story, a thread of coherence trying to weave itself back into the field. Through presence, curiosity, and compassion, these patterns soften. They don't disappear, they begin to move. And in that movement, something deeper awakens. We begin to see that we are not the story, but the space the story moves through. Not the wave alone, but the ocean remembering itself in form. If this perspective resonates with you and you would like to see more similar content, please like and subscribe. In the comments, please feel free to share your thoughts on the patterned aspects of human experience. In the next video, we'll explore some practical implications for how to nurture the patterned self in your day-to-day life. Thank you for listening.